right, so one of the hot button topics on the channel has been speaker placements for the home theater 2.0, particularly those side and rear surrounds, and were they too high? And I went into some detail about my thought process of why I put them where I put them. And I'm also kind of expecting some folks, maybe by now already they have, to also make some feedback about the living room mains. They're a little higher than they maybe should be or need to be. And so my friend Dan DiCarlo, local custom integrator at AudioVision, again, I mentioned him in the past on the channel. He's done a ton of work for our home back from our original construction, and I sourced a variety of my components for Home Theater 2.0 from him. He's my Control 4 integrator and such as well. Of course, he's watching the channel. We were chatting about this also, and he gave me this document essentially it came from Triad, but it's published by Dolby, and it's basically the Dolby Atmos home theater new rules with a published date of February 2022. But he sent me these document. It's got seven specific items of placement consideration and recommendations for Atmos rooms. And so I wanted to go through each of these kind of one by one, and I'll read it and then talk about, like, okay, am I achieving that one? We'll see how many of these that I achieve in my home theater, and kind of go through some thought processes on each of them. And hopefully you can take something away from that into considerations and such for your own room. So I'll read them, but I'll put them up kind of on the bottom as well. So rule number 1, the most topical one: position all, capital ALL, all listener level speakers, meaning everything in the bed layer, the fronts, the side surrounds, the rear surrounds, with their acoustic center, referring to that as the tweeter, below the wall's midpoint. Reserve the upper half of the room for height effects. And then there's an asterisk there. The asterisk says, except Dolby Atmos enabled height modules, which can be positioned in the upper or lower half of the room with their drivers no lower than eye level. I believe that I had mentioned in my prior video that my side and rear surrounds were 63 inches off of the floor, roughly 5 feet. My room is 10 feet 11 inches, rounded off, let's call it 11 feet. So at roughly 5 feet, 5 is less than half of 11, and I am in spec for Dolby Atmos home theater rules. All speakers with their acoustic centers below the wall's midpoint. So there you go. So as long as you're in the lower half, you're fundamentally in spec. They don't give a recommendation, at least in this document, for how below the half you should be. I think that's relative to other factors and other considerations. Again, how tall is your seating? Are you on risers? And how many rows do you have? And all that sort of stuff. But according to the Dolby spec, I'm in there. I'm below my speakers, their tweeters and such are below the midpoint of those side walls and that back wall, because I put them both at the same heights. I have one row of seating, and it all works out in my favor. Could I still drop them 6 inches? Maybe, but at the end of the day, I'm in spec. So number 2, use only speakers that can focus an image with accurate panning, meaning monopoles and bipoles, not dipoles. So in all my home theater excursions from the 5.1 system I did in our first home back in like 2000, and then I carried that system through a couple of moves, and I did my living room setup when we first did the house here with all the speakers and crazy speakers in the ceiling, and now the home theater. I've never bought dipoles. I've always basically used, single radiating speakers. So checkbox there for me. I know some manufacturers are still making like dipole style speakers, and some manufacturers make speakers where you can like switch their modes, so you can buy a speaker that could be a monopole and a dipole, and you can flip a switch. To me, that seems wasteful. Like, why would I want to spend money? I'd rather just buy the best like monopole speaker that I can buy, rather than buying a speaker that obviously had some of its budgetary dollars spent on these extra drivers and these extra modes. So my recommendation, what I've done with all my speakers and all my spaces, is just don't buy dipoles. Just stick to direct radiating speakers, and that's it. And then you're in spec. So number 1 and number 2, I'm meeting the Dolby Atmos requirements so far. Number 3, position side and rear surround speakers with tweeters on the same plane as your front LCRs. And they specifically say within 1.25x. And so this one's not entirely clear, so I'm going to make a little bit of an inference about what I think they mean. So what I think this is saying is if you measure from the floor to the tweeter of your front LCRs, right, and then times that by 0.25, and that's your 0 point. So you add either 0.25 or you subtract either 0.25. Again, you want the tweeters of your side and rear surrounds to be within that plane. So they could be a little higher, they could be a little lower, but within 25% essentially, up or down. I guess I could also read that, I could read that differently. Maybe it's not plus 25% or minus 25%. Maybe it's times 25% divided by 2, so it's plus 12.25 or minus 12.25%. In any case, I haven't measured this for my room. However, if I recall where I know I put my speakers vertically on that front wall behind the screen, and I were to kind of extrapolate where the side surrounds ended up, I feel pretty confident that I'm within the spec. So I'm going to take a check mark, maybe put an asterisk on my check mark that someday maybe I'll go in there and measure it, but I got to climb behind the screen and measure this and measure that. But I feel pretty confident about where everything ended up. And so you could argue potentially that, well, did my front speakers end up a little too high on the wall? And no, I really don't think they did. I think they are a little bit lower. The tweeters are a little bit lower than those side and rear surrounds, but not by a huge margin. And I had to do what I had to do anyway, because I had electrical wire going through this wall, other things that I had to position around. That's the way it goes. I didn't strip my room, to the studs and route and build everything specifically for home theater. That room was done and finished, and I did the best I could with what I had, but I feel I'm good. I think I meet this one as well. But again, side and rear surround speakers with tweeters in the same plane, 1.25x is your front LCRs. That's number 3. Number 4, this one's a little longer. Position ceiling height speakers at least 2 times the height of the listener's ears above their floor or riser. Angled baffle speakers cover deep seating areas better than downfiring speakers. Put front pair forward of the front row, aimed to the rear and back to behind the back row, aimed to the front. Achieve within 3 dB of front LCRs at the prime spot. So this is a real compound one, because it's talking about height speakers and depending angle baffles and all that sort of thing. And so, but the key element I think here is 2 times the height of the listener's ears above the floor or riser. So on our couch, we're actually sitting pretty low. 2 times that and such above, I wouldn't have to go very high if I had heights. And when I did have heights, I just put them as high as I could. Again, I've got close to an 11-foot ceiling in there, ceiling space. I really tried to make the most of using it, but now I don't have the heights. I've moved the speakers to the top. And so these 2x numbers and heights and so on, I'm definitely meeting all of this. However, I didn't choose to go angled baffles. Technically, yes, I could angle the tweeters that are in the Focal 1000 rounds that are up there, but right now I'm not. They're all firing straight down. But if you go back to my other videos, you'll know I kind of have a little bit of a tighter pattern because, again, I'm limited. I was limited by what I could do. I had certain joist openings that I could get wire through easily without having to fish through and around other things that were going on in the ceiling. I ended up 4 or 5 feet apart and about left to right and about 5 feet apart front to back. And they are a little tight right around kind of the mid-3 seating points of the couch. And if you're sitting out on the wings, the farther seats, you're outside the square, right, of those 4 ceiling speakers. That's okay. Everything comes with trade-offs. Everything comes with compromises. But in terms of, again, the amount of height that we have here and where things are pointed, shooting relative to where we're seating, I think I'm pretty good. And I'm happy with this one. It's kind of a compound one, maybe not a full check box, maybe a half a check, at least in terms of meeting the heights. But the other thing too, I have 1 row of seating. So they're talking about angled baffles if you have multiple rows. That kind of makes sense because when you're trying to service 2 rows of people sitting in your space, you got a whole different level of considerations and such to deal with versus 1 row. and I don't have that complexity. So anyway, that's number 4. Number 5, keep listeners' ears at least 24 inches clear of back and side walls. 36 inches or further is better. This results in better Atmos panning and clearer dialogue. So basically, yeah, don't sit up against a wall, right? Don't sit right up against a side wall. Don't sit right up against a rear wall. Am I meeting this? Well, certainly in my middle 3 seats, I'm good to go. We're like 4 feet. The whole back of the couch is roughly like 4 feet, give or take, off of the back wall. So I got a nice amount of space kind of going on back there for every seat. All right, so this one I did go measure really quick, and we're in spec. Actually, we're within the full spec. So on my couch, even if one were sitting and kind of sitting all the way to the outside and kind of sitting up against the armrest, your head would be right on the line at 36 inches off the wall. So 24 inches falls not quite, roughly around like the midpoint of the armrest. And so again, you'd be sitting kind of inside of the armrest. So even the people laying down on the farthest edges of our couch are within the spec. And as mentioned, from the back wall, everybody's good. From the side wall, everybody's good. So happy with that one. Checkbox for number 5. Number 6, only one speaker per output channel. And then in parentheses, they say use bipoles instead of multiple monopoles. So this one's pretty similar in some respects to the prior one, which was number 2, about like what type of speakers to use in this type of a setup. So in this case, absolutely a checkbox. I off of each amplifier channel, per output channel, per position, etc., I use one speaker. I don't have a need to do more than that. If I were to add more speakers to the room, I would still stick with the idea of making them discrete. But with the space that I have, the layout that I have, 1 row of seating, I don't need more overheads. I don't need like parallel surrounds, to service multiple rows. So I'm very happy with a 1 row theater room because it really saves you some headache in figuring out how do you make good sound for a back row, and then how does making good sound for the back row or relatively good sound not compromise the front row. So if it depends on your needs. Some people have the money, first of all, so it doesn't even matter, or you have monster size rooms where you've got 2 rows or 2 rows in a stand-up bar or 3 rows, all this kind of stuff. That's beyond the scope of my space. I've got a nice, still good size, right? We're talking about a 19 by 18, 17 and a half inch room. So enough room to spread everything out, right? To be off of those walls and have things in good positions, enough space to get a nice big impactful screen and such in there. But 1 row, and it just simplifies so much stuff. So check mark here, 1 speaker per output channel, and I have no need to try to multiplex up or whatever. And then the last one, number 7. This is an interesting one. Atmos sounds better with more diffusion than absorption. But they don't give any specific guidance. This is just a 1-pager, right? A little 1-slider kind of top level rules to keep in mind. So more diffusion than absorption. I don't think I take a check on this one. Fundamentally in my space, I think I'm running more absorption than diffusion based on the panels and that I have in there. So I have 4 or 2 big tri-traps, corner traps in each corner. There's no scatter plates in those. So those are absorption, but there is some range limiting and some other internals applied. I have the bigger monster bass traps from GIK that are right now in the room, kind of centered behind the couch. Those have scatter plates, so those are diffusion and absorption. I added a couple of the 2A panels on the back wall to put a little, mostly as a blemish cover up, but that added a little, added diffusion with a tad of absorption. But the trios of the 242 panels down each sidewalls, those are absorption only. So I don't have diffusion on the sidewalls anywhere. You could say maybe some sound hitting the door could be scattering things. It has the recessed panels and such, but there's nothing matching that on the right hand side. I do have 8 of the GIK 2A 2D diffusion panels coming for the ceiling. So I'll be those are 2 by 2 foot a piece. So I'll be adding a good amount of square foot coverage, diffusion coverage with on a little bit of foam to the ceiling pretty soon. But yeah, so I'm probably rocking more absorption in the space than diffusion. And we'll see. Once I get the 2A panels up, I don't think I'm going to be treating the room hardly much more at all. My downside is if I did more on that front wall up towards the screen, yeah, I have some wall space on the right-hand side to do that, but the door is on the left-hand side. So it wouldn't be symmetric at that point. Whatever I would do there, I could not achieve symmetry. And I think ultimately my goal for the right-hand side in that open space is to do a movie poster. I'd really like to do a movie poster there and add something that adds some visual to the room, particularly because it's right across the door as you walk in. So you'd open the doors, you go into the room and say, oh, cool, movie poster, right? And then you enter into the rest of the space and such. So that's my goal for that. I'll talk more about that in some future vlogs. But in any case, rule number 7, Atmos sounds better with more diffusion than absorption, but there's no guidelines, there's no percentages here. Acoustical treatment is something that's very, very specific to a space. I did consultation for my room with GIK back 4 years ago when I made the original panel order, and even for the couple of things that I added or am in the process of adding with Home Theater 2.0, I talked to the folks there, the techs there, and kind of took their recommendations for what to do next. And they were talking diffusion more than absorption because we biased kind of towards absorption to begin with. But I think it sounds good. It measures pretty good as it is. And so, yeah, I guess no checkbox for number 7, but without any specific guidance, I guess I don't know what else I would do there. And my room I think is still pretty well treated overall. It's very calming. I can tell the difference right away when I'm standing out in the basement talking, and then you walk into that room and everything it's not an anechoic chamber, it's not pulling the life out of stuff, but it's really dialing it in. So Dolby Atmos home theater rules, shared by Triad, published by Dolby, and furnished by my professional custom installer friend, dated February 2022. I would presume if he had a more updated guidance than that, he would have sent it rather than this specific document. So sound off in the comments. How many of these rules does your space meet? Do you meet all 7? Are there some that you made a specific kind of choice not to follow, or that you had to make a trade-off, right? And despite your best efforts, you couldn't achieve what the rule is telling you is the best. I'm curious. Sound off and let me know your home theater experience, your trade-offs, your compromises, and how you think about these rules, and if you have some other guidance, some other rules that you followed in your space, link them in the comments and let's talk about them. Ask some questions. And thanks so much for watching. Please absolutely like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Look down in the description for some ways to support the channel. Thanks.